There is a fascinating moment in luxury travel when a person realizes their money cannot bend the laws of the physical universe. Most of us accept this. A select few, however, refuse to yield. From demanding that passenger elevators move horizontally to arguing with the laws of gravity in the casino, these real maritime incident reports show what happens when unstoppable entitlement meets an unmovable reality. 1. On day 3 of a 7-day Eastern Caribbean sailing aboard a massive 4,000-passenger megaship, a man we will call Arthur approached the guest services desk holding a piece of paper with the reverence of a medieval priest carrying a sacred scroll. Arthur was 62, wore pristine white sneakers, and possessed the specific kind of posture that suggested he had never once been wrong in his life. He bypassed the designated queue entirely, walked up to a young attendant named Diego, and placed a crumpled, slightly damp cruise line marketing brochure onto the marble counter. Arthur then pointed a rigid finger at the glossy photograph of the ship sailing through impossibly turquoise waters, and then pointed dramatically toward the large promenade windows showing the actual ocean outside, which was a perfectly normal, deep maritime navy blue. Arthur's complaint, filed formally and with absolute sincerity, was that the ocean was the wrong color. Have you ever looked at a piece of advertising collateral and decided it was a legally binding contract with nature? Arthur had. He explained to Diego, without a trace of irony, that he had specifically paid for the cyan-colored water depicted on page 14 of the pamphlet, and that the current dull cobalt situation outside was a textbook case of bait-and-switch corporate fraud. When Diego gently attempted to explain that the ocean's color changes based on water depth, cloud cover, and sunlight reflection, Arthur refused to accept maritime meteorology as an excuse for what he deemed poor customer service. He argued that if the cruise line could not deliver the advertised hue, they shouldn't have printed the brochure. He then demanded that the captain either immediately steer the vessel to an area where the water matched the specific Pantone shade of the photograph, or provide a 32% refund to compensate for the exact visual discrepancy he had mathematically calculated in his head. This specific brand of entitlement highlights a fascinating quirk of behavioral economics in the luxury hospitality sector. When consumers spend thousands of dollars for a highly curated, all-inclusive environment, their brains often completely stop distinguishing between the amenities the company can control, like the temperature of the buffet, and the phenomena nobody controls, like the physical properties of the Earth's oceans. Arthur spent the next 25 minutes standing at the desk with his phone calculator open, attempting to quantify the exact financial damage of his optical disappointment, loudly explaining his formula to an ever-growing line of irritated passengers. In the end, guest services patiently logged his official grievance under environmental dissatisfaction, a category that frankly deserves its own dedicated filing cabinet on every ship in the world. And Arthur spent the remaining 4 days of his vacation staring intently at the sea from his balcony, as if the Atlantic had intentionally conspired to ruin his Tuesday. 2. On day 2 of a Caribbean sailing aboard a brand-new 18-deck megaship, a passenger named Richard marched to the guest services desk to report a massive engineering failure. Richard was staying in an aft cabin, which required a 300-foot walk down a long carpeted corridor from the midship atrium. He approached a purser and filed a formal grievance against the ship's elevator system. Richard explained that while the elevators successfully transported him from Deck 5 to Deck 12, they completely failed to transport him horizontally down the hallway to his room. The purser, initially confused, tried to gently explain the fundamental mechanics of an elevator, specifically that it is a vertical box suspended by cables in a stationary shaft. Richard dismissed this explanation entirely. He argued that since the ship was marketed in brochures as a state-of-the-art vessel, it was completely unacceptable that the elevators only moved up and down. He filed a formal demand stating that until the cruise line installed horizontal elevators in the corridors, the crew must provide him with a motorized scooter to compensate for the corporation's glaring architectural oversight. 3. On the 6th morning of a 14-day transatlantic repositioning cruise from Miami to Barcelona, a passenger named Brenda marched down to the guest services plaza on Deck 5, holding a yellow legal pad covered in frantic arithmetic. Transatlantic crossings are notorious for temporal disorientation, because as the ship sails east, The onboard clocks must be moved forward by 1 hour almost every single night to keep pace with the destination's local time. Most passengers simply accept this as a mild inconvenience and order an extra coffee. Brenda, however, viewed planetary rotation as a coordinated financial heist. She stepped up to a stoic Romanian purser named Florin and placed her legal pad onto the counter. Brenda pointed to a series of equations which divided the total cost of her balcony cabin by exactly 336 hours, the standard mathematical duration of a 14-day period. She then explained with absolute sincerity that because the ship had advanced its clocks for 4 consecutive nights, she had currently only been provided 332 hours of vacation. She was filing a formal grievance to demand a pro-rated cash refund for the 4 missing hours, plus preemptive financial compensation for the remaining 2 time changes yet to come. Florin, possessing the kind of profound emotional restraint that only comes from years of maritime hospitality, pulled up a map on his monitor and attempted to explain the physical mechanics of longitude. He gently outlined how time zones are globally recognized geographic boundaries, not arbitrary corporate policies designed to shorten her trip. Brenda dismissed this entire concept as a convenient excuse. She argued that since the ship was floating in international waters, they were not legally bound by Spanish time, and therefore the captain was choosing to delete her vacation hours voluntarily just to save money on the all-inclusive buffet. Think about how the human mind processes the concept of value when a large sum of money is at stake. Behavioral economists note that when people feel anxious about the cost of a luxury experience, they often strip away the intangible joys of the trip and reduce the entire vacation to a strict, hourly commodity that must be guarded at all costs. Brenda did not care that she was experiencing a majestic, uninterrupted voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. She only cared that her Tuesday was arriving an hour earlier than her budget allowed. When Florin politely informed her that the cruise line could not issue onboard credit for the linear progression of time, Brenda proposed a very specific compromise. She demanded that the captain simply stop the ship from moving forward for 6 hours in the middle of the ocean, effectively pausing the vessel in a time zone-free void so she could sleep in and reclaim her stolen hours before they reached Europe. Florin meticulously typed her demand into the ship's official operational log, and Brenda left the desk highly unsatisfied, entirely unaware that she was going to gain all 6 of those hours back for free on her flight home. 4. If you have ever observed the morning rituals of a cruise ship pool deck, you know that otherwise ordinary adults will abandon all societal norms for the sake of a prime aluminum lounger. On a 12-day Mediterranean sailing aboard a massive 5,000-passenger vessel, a 48-year-old man named Greg treated the acquisition of deck chairs not as a vacation amenity, but as a complex geopolitical land grab. Every morning at precisely 4:45 a.m., Greg would ride the empty elevator to deck 16, bypass the numerous "no reserving chairs" signs, and secure 4 front-row loungers using a highly specific barricade of decoy items: a half-empty bottle of generic aloe vera, a single orthotic water shoe, a pair of scratched aviators, and a waterlogged thriller novel. For 3 days, this system worked flawlessly until the deck patrol finally enforced the 30-minute vacancy rule and confiscated his items. Greg did not just complain. He escalated the situation to a legal tribunal. He marched into the hotel director's office holding a meticulously drafted 4-page handwritten grievance, citing violations of maritime salvage rights. Greg argued that by placing his personal artifacts on the loungers, he had established a binding sovereign claim to the territory, and the crew's removal of his single water shoe constituted an illegal seizure of assets. The hotel director, possessing the blank, unfocused stare of a man who has spent 2 decades mediating arguments between sunburned millionaires, politely explained that the ship's furniture belongs to the corporation, not whoever touches it first. This explanation only fueled Greg's paranoia. Convinced that a rival faction of suite-level passengers was bribing the crew to steal his spots, Greg decided to gather incontrovertible forensic evidence. On morning 4, he set up his iPad behind a potted artificial palm tree, hit record, deployed his aloe vera and single shoe, and retreated to the buffet to wait in the shadows. 2 hours later, finding his chairs empty again, a triumphant Greg carried his iPad directly to the chief of security. He filed a formal demand for the immediate identification and confinement of the thieves, slamming the tablet onto the desk and pressing play for the officer to witness the crime. The two men stood in silence as the high-definition footage revealed exactly what had happened to the sovereign territory. The video clearly showed Greg's own wife, Linda, walking onto the deck at 5:30 a.m. in her bathrobe. Looking profoundly exhausted by her husband's daily territorial hoarding, Linda methodically scooped up the aloe, the shoe, the glasses, and the thriller novel, dumped all of them into the dirty towel return bin, and walked back to the elevators. A normal person would have folded in humiliation, apologized to the security officer, and quietly returned to their cabin. Greg simply paused the video, tapped the screen, and formally demanded that the officer write up his wife for corporate espionage. When adults enter vacation mode, the sudden loss of their daily responsibilities often creates a psychological vacuum. To regain a sense of control, they will sometimes obsessively overmanage tiny, meaningless territories, like a poolside chair, treating a minor inconvenience as a profound personal injustice. The security officer solemnly noted Linda's offense in the unofficial daily log, and Greg spent the rest of the voyage sitting in the shaded, undesirable rows near the funnel, keeping a highly suspicious eye on his spouse. 5. During the second afternoon of an Alaskan sailing on a premium European cruise line, right as the ship navigated the breezy inside passage, a solo traveler named Helen called guest relations from cabin 14022 to report a severe structural flaw. Helen was incensed that her $100 salon blowout was ruined the second she stepped onto the upper deck, and she wanted the problem fixed immediately. She did not ask for a complimentary comb. Instead, she demanded to know exactly where the maintenance panels were located so she could manually power down the exterior fans. The officer on duty politely informed Helen that there were no fans on the open deck and that she was currently experiencing a natural phenomenon known as wind, compounded by the ship moving forward at 22 knots. Helen scoffed, insisting that a modern vessel costing nearly $1 billion simply must have a centralized climate control system for the outside promenades. She formally requested that the captain turn the wind down to a low setting whenever she needed to walk from the spa back to her suite, treating a 90,000-ton vessel in a glacial fjord exactly like a suburban thermostat. 6. Routine disruption does strange things to the human psyche, and nowhere is this more evident than in the case of Beatrice, a 55-year-old solo traveler in cabin 10224 who filed one of the most creatively paranoid complaints in maritime history. Every morning, the cabin steward, a cheerful man named Putu, would clean Beatrice's room and leave a standard piece of towel origami on her bed, strictly following the cruise line's mandatory hospitality manual. On day 4, Beatrice arrived at the guest services desk carrying 3 large clear plastic bags. Inside each bag was a collapsed, crumpled white towel. She placed them on the counter with the grim determination of a prosecutor submitting forensic evidence and filed a formal grievance for psychological harassment against her steward. Beatrice explained to the purser that Putu was leaving her highly specific, coded threats. She pointed to the first bag and stated that the towel elephant left on Tuesday was a deliberate mocking commentary on her weight. She pointed to the second bag, claiming Wednesday's towel monkey was a clear insinuation that she lacked intelligence. Finally, she tapped the third bag, insisting that Thursday's towel snake was a blatant accusation that she was deceitful. The purser stared at the limp piles of terry cloth, trying to process the absolute absurdity of a corporate hospitality initiative being interpreted as a psychological thriller. In behavioral psychology, this phenomenon is called apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns or malicious intent in completely unconnected data. When people are removed from their familiar daily routines and placed in an isolating environment, their brains often desperately search for narrative meaning where none exists. The purser attempted to show Beatrice the official company binder, complete with diagrams, proving that the elephant, monkey, and snake were simply the standard Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday folding rotation applied to all 4,000 cabins on board. Beatrice flatly rejected this cover story. She argued that the corporate binder was a convenient alibi, demanding that Putu be immediately transferred to another deck and that all future linens be delivered to her room completely flat, folded into perfectly neutral squares devoid of any subtext. 7. During a port stop in Juneau, Alaska, a couple in their late 50s bypassed the local souvenir shops, marched directly back onto the ship, and demanded an immediate audience with the shore excursions manager. They had just returned from a highly rated $300 helicopter tour of a famous local glacier, and they were profoundly dissatisfied with the maintenance of the environment. The husband placed both hands on the desk and filed a formal demand for a full refund, citing a complete lack of proper pedestrian infrastructure. He complained that the top of the glacier was covered in jagged ice, uneven terrain, and slippery slush, which had completely ruined his expensive designer loafers. The manager paused, took a very slow breath, and gently reminded the couple that a glacier is, by definition, a massive, untamed river of natural ice. The wife rejected this geographic reality entirely, arguing that if the cruise line knew paying passengers were going to be walking up there, they were legally obligated to send a maintenance crew ahead of time to shovel a clear pathway and put down some rock salt. 8. On the 5th night of a Bahamas cruise aboard a massive American vessel, a 34-year-old accountant named Keith marched into the casino manager's office to report a fundamental violation of the laws of physics. Keith had just spent 3 hours sitting at a brightly lit Lucky Mermaid slot machine, where he meticulously lost exactly $412. Rather than accepting this as the standard statistical outcome of gambling, Keith filed a formal grievance requesting a complete refund, arguing that the ship's nautical movements had rigged the machinery against him. He placed a cocktail napkin on the manager's desk, upon which he had drawn a diagram of the ship. Keith explained with the quiet, unblinking confidence of a tenured professor that because the vessel was currently experiencing a slight 2-degree list to the port side, gravity was naturally pulling the slot machine's spinning reels downward at an unfair angle, causing the winning cherry symbols to physically slip right past the pay line. The casino manager, possessing the deep, profound weariness of a man who watches people make terrible financial decisions for a living, politely attempted to explain the concept of modern digital gaming. He gently informed Keith that the machine did not contain actual mechanical wheels, but was simply a flat video screen governed by a computerized random number generator. Keith dismissed this technological reality completely. He confidently argued that gravity still affects computers, insisting that the slight tilt of the ship was pulling the microchip's electrons downward, thereby disrupting the payout algorithm. We have all tried to blame an inanimate object for our own failures at some point. But when passengers experience the acute sting of a major financial loss, the ego acts as a powerful defense mechanism, often inventing highly complex external variables to blame rather than simply admitting they made a poor mathematical choice. Keith refused to accept that a programmed digital mermaid had simply taken his money. He officially demanded that the casino either refund his $400 in cash or immediately contact the bridge and have the captain tilt the entire 90,000-ton cruise ship exactly 2 degrees to the starboard side, just long enough for him to win his money back. The manager solemnly logged the complaint under maritime gravitational interference, and Keith spent the rest of the evening at the blackjack table, constantly checking the floor with a pocket spirit level. 9. The modern cruise ship fitness center is a masterpiece of design, usually featuring floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the open ocean. On a trans-Pacific crossing, a 24-year-old fitness enthusiast named Chloe utilized one of these treadmills for exactly 60 minutes, running at a brisk pace while facing the aft windows looking at the ship's wake. Upon finishing, she did not go to the juice bar. She went directly to the purser's desk on Deck 5 to file a complaint regarding a stolen workout. Chloe had just checked the ship's navigation channel on her phone and realized the vessel was traveling south at 22 knots, while her treadmill had been facing north. She explained to the purser that because she was running in the exact opposite direction of the ship's forward travel, the vessel's momentum had completely canceled out her physical exertion. She firmly believed she had essentially been running in place relative to the Earth's surface, and therefore had burned absolutely 0 calories. The purser attempted a brief, delicate explanation of relative velocity, pointing out that she was still moving her legs and sweating regardless of where the ship was going. Chloe rejected this concept entirely. She formally demanded a complimentary deep tissue massage to compensate for the cardiovascular sabotage, insisting that until the captain turned the ship around to match her running direction, the gym was a complete waste of time. 10. For most passengers, an all-inclusive buffet is simply a convenient place to eat lunch. For a 58-year-old man named Warren, sailing on a 10-day Southern Caribbean itinerary, the buffet was a commodities exchange, and he was determined to execute a hostile corporate takeover. Warren approached the concept of a flat-rate vacation, not with an appetite, but with a highly detailed spreadsheet. He did not just eat, he audited. During the first 3 days of the voyage, Warren openly carried a digital pocket scale to the buffet lines, meticulously weighing his portions. He actively avoided low-value fillers like pasta, rice, and bread, exclusively targeting high-yield assets like smoked salmon, carved roast beef, and imported cheeses, optimizing his plate for peak financial return rather than actual flavor. By day 6, however, he realized a fundamental flaw in his investment strategy. His physical stomach capacity was entirely insufficient to consume the financial equivalent of what he had paid for his ticket. To Warren, leaving the ship without extracting every single cent of value was a profound personal failure. He marched up to the food and beverage director, holding a printed ledger, documenting his daily caloric intake versus the theoretical maximum a human could consume over 10 days. Warren filed a formal grievance, stating he was currently operating at an 85,000-calorie deficit. He demanded that the cruise line settle this discrepancy before disembarkation, not in onboard credit, but in raw, vacuum-sealed physical assets. Warren requested 40 pounds of uncooked bacon, 12 whole wheels of brie cheese, and a specific 6-pound prime rib from the carving station, explaining he intended to pack these items into his suitcase and store them in his garage freezer in Ohio as deferred compensation. The psychology of flat-rate pricing creates a fascinating distortion in human logic. When consumers prepay for unlimited access to a resource, their brains often stop viewing food as nourishment and begin treating it as a financial yield that must be harvested at all costs, leading to intense anxiety if they feel they are leaving value on the table. The director, maintaining perfect professional neutrality, explained that health and safety regulations strictly prohibited passengers from treating the galleys like a wholesale distribution center, and formally denied the request for bulk raw meat. A normal person would have accepted defeat and perhaps eaten an extra dessert. Warren, however, simply pivoted his business model. If the corporation refused to honor his caloric surplus in perishable goods, he would transition to liquidating non-perishable condiments. For the next 2 days, Warren began systematically clearing out the buffet's supply of sealed, single-serve premium jams, honey jars, and imported butter packets, calculating their retail markup on his phone. This secondary heist ended when security caught him at the dining room exit with his cargo shorts physically bulging with exactly 70 pats of foil-wrapped butter, which were rapidly melting in the Caribbean heat. The director officially banned Warren from removing any food items from the dining area whatsoever. Faced with this ultimate embargo, Warren realized he had to liquidate his assets in hard materials. On the final morning of the cruise, security officers at the gangway pulled Warren aside because his largest rolling suitcase weighed roughly 80 pounds and was emitting a distinct clinking sound as it rolled over the carpet. Upon opening it, they did not find raw bacon or melted butter. They found 45 heavy ceramic dining room plates, neatly layered between his polo shirts. Warren stood completely unfazed as the officers unpacked the dishware. He calmly presented his spreadsheet to the customs officials, arguing that the amortized replacement value of the ceramics perfectly covered his unconsumed breakfast quotas, and he was legally entitled to take them home as a corporate settlement. The security team methodically confiscated every single plate and logged them back into the ship's inventory. Warren was left to wheel his completely empty suitcase down the gangway, walking away from his 10-day investment with nothing to show for it except a negative spreadsheet and a pair of heavily butter-stained cargo shorts. It turns out that removing a person's daily stress doesn't make them peaceful. It just forces their brain to invent new, highly complex problems, like plotting revenge against a terry cloth towel monkey. I'm curious, which of these complaints do you think the crew actually laughed about the most in the staff bar? Let me know your pick in the comments. Hit subscribe if you enjoy exploring the real, slightly uncomfortable side of human behavior.